A famous movie ghost once looked around an Iowa cornfield and asked if he was in heaven. A lot of folks in Iowa would answer yes. They know that in America's 29th state, the possibilities can be as endless as the sky. It's a place where fertile fields stretch to the horizon, magnificent animals still roam, and surprises await. In Iowa, people work hard, play hard, and have been even known to rock hard in a place where the music died, when three of America's rock legends met their tragic fate in an Iowa field. Today, young writers flock to an Iowa farmhouse to create prize-winning works. Young scientists find new ways to feed our growing world. And followers of a famous Indian guru gather under giant golden domes to seek enlightenment and inner peace, while another gleams above one of the nation's most stunning capitals. It was here in Iowa that Hollywood turned a steamy romance ripped from the pages of one of the most popular novels of modern times into an Oscar-nominated movie, and transformed one family's fields of corn into a field of dreams. But Iowans don't need outsiders to tell them their fields are full of promise. All they have to do is look around, and it's plain to see this is Iowa. When you soar across Iowa, the American heartland stretches as far as the eye can see. There are perfectly planted rows of crops, towering silos, and old farmhouses, postcard perfect images of a way of life that can only be found in the good old US of A. But Iowa hasn't always been this red, white, and blue. In 1682, France claimed the land that's now Iowa as part of a vast region the French called Louisiana. But France then lost Louisiana to Spain in 1763. Napoleon took it back in 1800 and then surprised the world by turning around and flipping it to President Thomas Jefferson just 3 years later. By the time of that historic deal, Iowa had already begun its journey from near wilderness to statehood. The transformation began here on Iowa's eastern border, at a place called Horseshoe Bluff. But these towering walls of stone weren't carved by nature. They were hollowed out of the earth by men searching for treasure. A French-Canadian named Julien Dubuque was one of them. He was also the first European to settle in what's now Iowa. In 1788, he made a deal with Iowa's native Meskwaki people to mine lead. But the Indians ended up doing most of the actual mining. Since this was Spanish territory at the time, Dubuque named the region Mines of Spain. He remained here right up until his death in 1810. By then, the mines of Spain actually lay inside the United States. Nearby, a stone tower marks Dubuque's final resting place, high above the Mississippi River. It also offers a commanding view of a region he and the many other miners who came after him left forever changed. One of the biggest of those changes was the birth of Iowa's first city in 1837. It was named after Dubuque himself. It got its start here on a bend in the Mississippi when the miners arrived. Immigrants fleeing overcrowded cities in the east soon helped Dubuque grow into a regional hub and a gateway to the west. Today, not far from the river, stands a fascinating piece of evidence from those early boom times. It's called a shot tower and is the only one of its kind west of the Mississippi. This 120-foot high structure was built to turn the region's raw lead into what was called shot, the round, simple bullets of the day. There was a good reason the shot tower was so tall. To make shot, workers climbed to the top. From there, they poured molten lead down through a grid. As each little glob of lead fell down through the tower's long shaft, it formed into a perfectly round ball. At the bottom, each ball hit a vat of water and cooled into a hardened, round bullet. The tower operated for just 2 years before a larger rival firm in St. Louis lowered its prices on shot and succeeded in putting Dubuque's tower out of business in 1858. But Dubuque itself continued to thrive thanks to another boom in agriculture. By 1891, it boasted a prosperous downtown, centered on the Dubuque County Courthouse. It still dominates the city skyline and shows off Dubuque's 19th century roots. Capping the building's 190-foot-high dome is a soaring bronze statue of Justice. But there's something even higher in Dubuque. It's a unique landmark that climbs 296 feet up this nearby hill. It's known as the 4th Street Elevator. The folks who run it claim it's the shortest, steepest railroad in the world. It was built in 1893 after the neighborhood at the top of the hill, known as Fenland Place, expanded. Residents up top needed a convenient way to get down to work in the city and back home again for a quick midday meal. Today, after a few modern updates, it still carts passengers up and down the hill. But now, most of them are tourists. When it opened, it welcomed all comers at just 5 cents a ride. Now, the trip up and down costs $3. There's a certain thrill to riding up a hill in Iowa. That's because this state is not well known for its jagged terrain. When most people imagine Iowa, they probably think of landscapes like this. Vast, flat stretches of farmland, covered by wide open skies. And country roads that are so amazingly straight and long, they simply disappear into the horizon. That's why driving a truck in Iowa can be a big challenge. You have to get ready to follow the same straight road for miles, whether it's an old farm road or the interstate. Luckily for truckers on Interstate 80, there's a big place to pull off and take a break. It bills itself as the largest truck stop in the world. And from the air, it looks like that could actually be true. It's known as Iowa 80 and has just about everything a trucker could ask for. Like more than 900 parking places, a truckomat for drivers to keep their rigs shining bright, a truck museum, showers, restaurants, an on-site chiropractor, a barber, a dentist, and more. When truckers roll out of Iowa 80, they're refreshed and all ready for the long road ahead. This national highway cuts right across Iowa, from east to west, and offers a chance to discover what lies at the heart of this Midwest state. Its farms. Here, strong-backed men and women have been making their livelihood from the land ever since European settlers began arriving here in the 1800s. Today, Iowa has more than 92,000 farms, and they cover 85% of the state. They have helped make Iowa one of the top 3 agricultural states in the nation. It's number 1 when it comes to soybeans and corn, a lot of which gets fed to the state's 4 million cows. But there's one field in Iowa that's not known for its cattle or crops. It's a place that's remembered for the memories of a tragedy that took place early one cold February morning in 1959. A date that's known as the day the music died. On the evening of February 2nd, 1959, Three of America's hottest rock and roll stars arrived here in the little Iowa resort town of Clear Lake to perform two sold-out shows at the Surf Ballroom. Buddy Holly had won worldwide fame for hits like Peggy Sue. Richie Valens had broken ethnic barriers with La Bamba. The Big Bopper was a DJ who had scored a hit of his own with Chantilly Lace. That night, they gave more than 1,000 teenage fans at the Surf Ballroom a show they would never forget. At the time, Holly's song, That'll Be the Day, was #1 on the charts. He was just 22 years old. When their performance was over, the three stars rushed off to the nearby Mason City Municipal Airport to catch a chartered plane to their next gig. At the time, there was just a light snow falling on the runway. At 12:55 a.m., their 21-year-old pilot received clearance from the tower for takeoff, and the three musicians finally lifted off into the night. What happened next quickly made headlines around the world and left rock and roll fans across America in shock. Just a few minutes after takeoff, they flew into an approaching storm. High winds made the plane's instruments unreliable, and the young pilot's lack of experience led him to lose control. He dipped too low, a wing hit the ground, and sent the plane tumbling across this field. The next morning, a search and rescue team discovered the wreckage. There were no survivors. Today, a small marker identifies the spot where their bodies were found. Nearby, a giant pair of glasses, modeled on the ones Buddy Holly always wore, marks the trail that leads to the crash site. That tragic night was immortalized as The Day the Music Died by Don McLean in his hit song American Pie, and in two separate Hollywood biopics. More than 50 years later, fans still come all the way out here to this Iowa field to pay their respects to three of rock and roll's earliest stars. But this isn't the only spot in Iowa that's gained Hollywood fame. There's a little town 130 miles to the south that has two, and not just once, but twice. It's a place called Winterset, named for its chilly weather. For decades, this town's imposing Madison County courthouse was its main attraction. That is until a family living in this little house on the south side of town brought Winterset its first brush with fame. It's the birthplace of one of the biggest stars in American movie history. He was born in 1907 as Marion Robert Morrison, but is better known to the world as John Wayne. Today, Winterset's main drag is named John Wayne Drive in his honor. Recognition of this Iowa native son's transformation into a cinema icon. But Wayne is no longer Little Winterset's only claim to fame, thanks to author Robert James Waller's best-selling romantic novel, The Bridges of Madison County. In 1994, production crews descended on this town to make a movie version of the book starring Clint Eastwood and Meryl Streep. Now, fans from around the world come to Winterset to visit the locations where the stars filmed their scenes. Many stop in at the Northside Cafe, a key location in the film, and then head out to see the famous Bridges of Madison County for themselves. One of the most popular is the 1883 Roseman Bridge. It may be the most famous covered bridge in the world. It's the one that photographer Robert Kincaid is looking for when he knocks on Francesca Johnson's door in Waller's famous novel. It's also where she leaves a note inviting him to dinner. But most of all, it's where Eastwood and Streep share one of their most passionate moments in the film. This romantic Hollywood story has inspired hundreds of couples to get married on the Roseman Bridge. But Iowa has plenty of real-life heroes, too. Down-to-earth men and women shaped by this state's rough winters and tough times. by hard days on the prairie and lonely nights on the frontier, by adversity and adventure. Iowans who have been known to risk everything and ask for nothing in return. One of those heroes was a 17-year-old Irish immigrant named Kate Shelley. In 1881, Shelley and her mother were living in a cabin close to Honey Creek. On the night of July 6th, the sound of a huge crash sent her rushing outside. A flood had washed part of a bridge away, and a work crew had plunged into the waters of the creek below. The young Kate knew that a midnight express passenger train was heading for the broken bridge, and that all those on board could plunge to their deaths if it weren't stopped in time. To warn the engineer, she had to crawl across a nearby bridge over the Des Moines River through wind, lightning, and rain. After finally reaching the other side, Shelley ran a half-mile up the pitch-dark tracks to the tiny Moingona station to sound the alarm. She got there just in time to stop the train and save the lives of 200 passengers on board. On her way home, she guided a rescue team back to the stranded workers. Today, two impressive spans over the Des Moines River, built more than 100 years apart, have been named the Kate Shelley High Bridge to honor her courage on that fateful night and the resolute spirit that is Iowa at its best. Sometimes seeing Iowa from the air can play tricks on the eye. From a distance, these brown cubes just outside the city of Ames seem like cargo containers, carefully arranged in a field. But get a little closer, and it's clear that they're not made from steel at all. They're actually the fabric nets of a plant farm at one of America's top agricultural schools, Iowa State University. Here in this field, scientists are developing new strains of seeds that can be tough enough to survive disease and disaster. Each of these nets is like a little lab with its own species of plants and its own pollinating insects, like bees. And that's why the researchers need to enter and exit the nets with great care, so the bees don't escape and cross-pollinate other plants. It's also why they have to water each net from outside, to bathe it with its own bug-free shower. After they're harvested, the seeds from these test plots will be checked in to a seed library, where they can later be checked out by scientists as they test and develop new strains of seedlings to help feed the modern world. This cutting-edge research got its start in Iowa almost 150 years ago. Iowa State University opened in 1869 with funding from a federal program designed to put a top agricultural college in every state. It was part of a wave of Western schools that chose to welcome women as students alongside men in the late 19th century. But women weren't the only ones welcome at Iowa State. African Americans were too. Future scientist George Washington Carver enrolled here in 1891 after a college in Kansas turned him down because of his race. Born into slavery, Carver earned 2 degrees at Iowa State and became the first black member of the faculty before moving on to a celebrated scientific career as a botanist and inventor. He gained fame for his work developing more than 100 new products from peanuts in order to try and help poor farmers across the South. A tough tackle from Ohio named Jack Trice was one of many black students who followed in Carver's footsteps. In 1922, Trice became the first African-American player on the Iowa State football team. But his own dreams of helping black farmers in the South were cut short. In 1923, Trice was trampled to death during a game against an all-white University of Minnesota squad. He died from hemorrhaged lungs and internal bleeding. Some of Trice's teammates called it murder and accused the Minnesotans of deliberately causing his fatal injuries because he was black. It would be more than 6 decades before any Iowa State football team would agree to play Minnesota again. Today, thousands of students here pursue degrees and conduct research in every kind of agricultural science. There are cutting-edge labs to study just about every aspect of modern food production. One of the proudest breakthroughs of Iowa scientists led to the creation of one of America's most famous cheeses. It happened here in the Food Sciences Building in the 1930s. Microbiologists Clarence Lane and Bernard W. Hammer were trying to find a way to make European-style cheese in America. The problem was, French blue cheeses like Roquefort, made from sheep's milk, required a delicate process that was proving hard to replicate in the U.S. Lane and Hammer developed a way to do it successfully using homogenized cow's milk instead. Two heirs to the Maytag appliance fortune helped fund the research in the hopes of finding new uses for the milk from the Holstein cows on their family farm. In 1941, here on the Maytag Dairy Farm in Newton, they produced their first batch of cheese using the Iowa State method. Today, Maytag blue cheese is prized across the nation, and it's still made right here on this Iowa farm. A little over 2 centuries ago, very little was known about the land that's now Iowa. But in 1804, famed explorers Lewis and Clark set foot on its shores, where they endured one of the biggest tragedies of their epic journey across the American West. It's still possible to travel up the Missouri River, along Iowa's western border, and imagine what it must have been like to navigate this great waterway more than 2 centuries ago. In places, the Missouri's slow-moving waters and wild banks appear much as they probably did to the famed American explorers Meriwether Lewis and William Clark. In 1804, they stepped aboard a keelboat, which looked much like this modern-day replica, and headed up the Missouri. President Thomas Jefferson himself had given them their orders to make the first crossing of the newly acquired Louisiana Territory, find out what was there, and map a route to the Pacific Ocean and the West. Much of the time, they were forced to drag the boat upriver, using ropes from shore. In late July that year, they arrived on a stretch of the Missouri River that now serves as the border between Iowa and Nebraska. By August 19, 1804, they had reached a sharp bend in the river, just south of what's now Sioux City. They set up camp near a bluff. By now, one of their crew members, Sergeant Charles Floyd, had fallen gravely ill. By the next afternoon, he was dead. Modern doctors think he probably died from appendicitis. Surprisingly, he was the only member of the Lewis and Clark expedition to perish during their epic journey across the American West. In 1901, this 100-foot-tall stone obelisk was erected here in Sioux City to mark Floyd's grave. It honors a sacrifice that helped pave the way for a flood of settlers seeking better lives in Iowa and across the West. But that settlement came at the expense of the people who already lived here. Iowa got its name from the Iowa Indians, a Sioux people who had long called this region home. But in the early 1800s, their ancient way of life came to an end, as they and other native tribes were pushed aside by settlers from the east. By 1840, there were 43,000 new immigrants in Iowa alone. Within just 10 years, that number had shot up to 190,000. Most immigrants came to carve farms out of Iowa's virgin land, using tools and techniques that seem primitive today. To show just how hard that work could be, Reenactors at Iowa's Living History Farms are helping recreate conditions on an Iowa homestead in the 1850s, when settlers relied on their own hard labor, simple tools, and the wool from herds of sheep to survive Iowa's cold Midwestern winters. But these settlers went through some big changes over the next few years. Soon, towns began sprouting up among the homesteads. Together with the railroads, they brought the farmers store-bought supplies and conveniences they could only dream of before, and marked the beginning of the end of the frontier days. Iowa's transformation into a modern state was well underway. Congress declared Iowa an official territory in 1838. Its new borders stretched from Canada in the north all the way down to what's now the state of Missouri in the south. In 1846, the lower part of this vast territory was split off to create the state of Iowa. It's the only state in the Union with navigable rivers on two of its borders, the Mississippi to the east and the Missouri to the west. The eastern town of Iowa City was chosen as the state capital. It was already home to the territorial government and had a building that Iowa could use as the State House. Inside, newly elected officials immediately set about bringing order to their booming new state. But as Iowa's population expanded rapidly from east to west, its new residents demanded that the state capital be moved west too. They finally got their way in 1857, when state officials loaded their desks, chairs, safes, and official papers onto ox carts and moved the capital west, from Iowa City to Des Moines. At the time, Des Moines was more centrally located, but that was just about the only thing it had to offer. The town got its start in 1843, when the U.S. Army built a fort near the spot where the Des Moines and Raccoon Rivers converge, right where the minor league Iowa Cubs play their home games today. Soon after Des Moines was declared the new capital, work began on a new state house. But it would be almost 30 years and $2.8 million later that it finally opened its doors. Today, it's one of the most impressive state houses in the nation, thanks in part to its 5 stunning domes, including this massive central vault gilded in 23-karat gold. But the architects of Iowa's new capital were out to do more than just dazzle the eye. They designed every detail of their Renaissance Revival masterpiece to endow the new state government with dignity and to highlight its links to traditions of self-governance going back to ancient times. The deal that sent the capital west had compensated Iowa City for its loss by naming it the University of Iowa's permanent home. They also donated the old state building to the new school. It remains the center of a campus that now flanks both sides of the Iowa River. But on a lot of Saturday afternoons in the fall, the heart of the University of Iowa campus is the field of Kinnick Stadium. It's named to honor Iowa's 1939 Heisman Trophy winner and World War II hero, Niall Kinnick, who died while training to be a fighter pilot in 1943. Its official capacity is now 70,585, and games almost always sell out. Over the years, the Hawkeyes have had 11 undefeated home seasons. But the folks who gather in this little Victorian house on the other side of campus have racked up an even more impressive record. 17 Pulitzer Prizes, a number of National Book Awards, and a slew of other honors. They were all won by graduates of the Iowa Writers Workshop, a unique creative writing program that was founded at the University of Iowa in 1936. This graduate program brings some of the country's most promising young writers to Iowa to hone their craft. Flannery O'Connor, Rita Dove, John Irving, and Michael Cunningham are just a few of those who've passed through. After teaching here in the 1960s, Kurt Vonnegut Jr. warned an incoming fellow teacher, "Every so often you'll go nuts. The cornfields get to you." But maybe the endless rows of corn around Ames have inspired some writers to create their greatest works. Just as these rugged Iowa hills have inspired engineers to create one of the nation's greatest bridges. When a team of workers and engineers arrived here in Boone County, Iowa in 1905, they knew well that this state is not entirely flat. In fact, that's exactly why they were here. They'd come to build a railroad bridge over this deep but narrow gorge. In its day, the Bass Point Creek High Bridge was state-of-the-art. It had to be. The engineers' first bridge, made of wood, was damaged in a flood. To make sure it never happened again, they replaced it with this towering steel span. It's still the tallest single-track interurban railroad bridge in the U.S. For decades, the trains that crossed it carried Iowa coal and gypsum to markets across the nation. Now, they carry tourists. As soon as the train leaves the trees and starts its journey over the bridge, passengers get to enjoy one of this relatively flat state's most thrilling views. And a chance to relive a time when trains were a key link between Iowa and the outside world. Once, the state was crisscrossed by more than 10,000 miles of track. Today, less than 4,000 miles are still in use. But trains still play a vital role in delivering Iowa's goods to market. One of those is a supermarket favorite from Cedar Rapids that's one of America's top brands, Quaker Oats. In the 1870s, an ambitious father and son team named Robert and John Stewart built a little oat mill here on the banks of the Cedar River. In 1901, they joined forces with 3 rival mills, and a new food giant, Quaker Oats, was born. Over the next decades, the Stewarts' modest mill was transformed into an enormous manufacturing plant. The railway and new industries like Quaker Oats helped make Cedar Rapids a booming little city that lured new residents from around the world, including the Middle East. Most of those came from an area that now lies in Lebanon and Syria. Many were Muslim. After renting a local hall to practice their faith, Cedar Rapids' Arab Muslim community banded together and built their own mosque in 1934. Today, this little building with its distinctive green dome is the oldest standing mosque in the United States, which is why it's known as the Mother Mosque. During the famous Iowa flood of 2008, the Mother Mosque was flooded with 10 feet of water, which destroyed many of the historic papers, film, and photographs that documented its rich history. The building itself has since been restored. Iowa's 2008 flood was so unexpected, it nearly swallowed Cedar Rapids City Hall, which lay here on Mays Island. Photographs of the flood show the bottom floors of the Lynn County Courthouse completely swamped by the river's raging waters. It took years for Cedar Rapids to recover, but today it remains a very productive working-class town. Fly over the south of the city, and the aroma of one of America's most popular breakfast cereals fills the air. Freshly baked Cheerios, coming from this huge plant owned by another breakfast food giant, General Mills. Iowa boy Ashton Kutcher had a summer job here sweeping Cheerio dust off the floor before moving on to Hollywood and fame. Plants like this one provide a steady demand for grain from Iowa's farmers, which is why much of the Iowa landscape remains an impressive and seemingly endless quilt of farmland. Sometimes, it even seems like the most important things in Iowa happen out in the fields. The Iowans gathered here today in the town of Amana would probably agree. They're here to pay homage to an all-American icon and prove that farmers and tractors share a special bond, especially when the tractor is a classic Alice Chalmers. Alice introduced its first model in 1914 and then turned out a series of tractors aimed at the small and medium-sized farmer. With their signature orange paint jobs, they were some of the most popular ever built. The company stopped production in 1985, and now for many, owning a vintage Alice Chalmers is a big source of pride. Every year, dozens of farmers and fans come here to show off their tractors, do a little wheeling and dealing in parts, and celebrate what collectors like to call the orange spirit. There's a very good reason why Iowans are especially fond of these old machines. The gasoline-powered tractor was invented right here in Iowa. But it took more than a century of innovation. By the 1890s, the pioneers' slow oxen had been replaced by faster horses. But plowing and reaping with animals was still very hard work. Today, this modern tractor allows one operator to do a job that would once have taken teams of horses. When these machines arrived in the early 20th century, they set off a revolution in American farming, thanks to an Iowa farmer and inventor named John Freilich. Back in 1892, he managed to build the first gasoline-powered tractor that could move forwards and backwards. His company was bought out in 1918 by industry giant John Deere, which didn't have a tractor of its own at the time. Now, John Deere is one of the largest producers of tractors in the world. Most of them are still made here in Waterloo, Iowa, in a giant plant that stands on the site of Freilich's original factory. The huge complex has its own foundry, engine factory, engineering center, and assembly plant. John Deere claims it's the largest tractor factory in the world. Thousands of these green machines are shipped out of here every year to over 130 countries, helping to lift John Deere's income to record levels in 2013. Inventors have done well in Iowa, but dreamers and idealists have too. Some came fleeing persecution for their unorthodox religious beliefs. Mormons were among the first to arrive. They began flooding into Iowa in 1846, after their homes across the river in Nauvoo, Illinois, were attacked by anti-Mormon mobs. Thousands more would follow them through Iowa over the next few years, as the Mormons made their mass migration west to Salt Lake City. Many would have to walk, pulling their belongings in handcarts. With so many Mormons crossing Iowa, some travelers stopped and started camps to serve their fellow refugees. One of the largest lay here on a slight rise in the land in Iowa's southwest corner. It was named Mount Pisgah, after the Old Testament peak that gave Moses his first glimpse of the Promised Land. From 1846 to 1852, the men and women who ran the camp gave shelter to a flood of exhausted Mormon refugees, up to 2,000 at a time. They housed them in tents and log cabins, like this replica on the site. They fed the hungry travelers, using produce grown in these nearby fields, before sending them on their way. But as many as 800 Mormons died before they could continue on to Utah. After the exodus came to an end, Mount Pisgah was abandoned. Today, foundations of a few of the original cabins can still be seen in the fields here. And there's a slender monument hidden in the trees. These are just about the only signs that the Mormons ever passed this way. In 1974, the little Iowa farming town of Fairfield began a surprising transformation, thanks to the arrival of an Indian spiritual guru. His name was Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. His followers were practitioners of transcendental meditation, or TM, and arrived to take over an abandoned college campus here. Their TM movement was founded in the 1950s and has inspired everyone from the Beatles to Oprah, director David Lynch, Jerry Seinfeld, and about 6 million others around the globe. Fairfield is now the group's U.S. headquarters. From the air, it looks like any other Iowa town, except for these two giant golden domes. One is for men, the other for women. Twice a day, thousands of TM meditators from across Fairfield come to these domes to sit in quiet contemplation. Their homes reflect their beliefs too. They've sparked a boom in houses built according to ancient Indian ideas. Large or small, each one faces east. A central rooftop skylight is designed to let sunlight into a sacred spot below, known as a Brahmasthan. So many followers of the Maharishi come to Fairfield, there's even a huge trailer park to house them. It's called Utopia Park. The little college that started it all is now known as MUM, the Maharishi University of Management. Graduates leave ready to pursue both rewarding jobs and inner peace. Fairfield may be a utopia for those seeking quiet contemplation, but all around this town, Iowa's farmers are hard at work, 24/7. Their fields blanket the land and create amazing patterns in the soil, especially from the air. Come late spring, their rows of corn rise from the earth and run on forever, right up to the horizon. Once it's harvested, much of that corn actually ends up in our gas tanks as ethanol. That transformation takes place here at a massive facility run by agricultural giant ADM. Today, gas at the pump is about 10% ethanol, which means it's big business. This one plant is the single largest producer in the country. Keeping it running at full capacity uses up to 5,000 acres worth of corn a day. Some say the massive diversion of corn to fuel production is driving up costs and contributing to food shortages, or complain that ethanol takes too much energy and water to make, and that agro-industrial giants like ADM help drive family farms out of business. Today, corporate farming in Iowa is on the rise, while the number of family farms is shrinking. When you see Iowa from the air, you quickly discover that this state's bounty isn't all man-made. There are also lush forests and rolling hills, and vast bodies of water that are some of the state's great treasures. In the northwest corner of Iowa, a number of large bodies of water stretch right up to the Minnesota border. Iowans call these their Great Lakes. They were all formed by glaciers 10,000 years ago. Lake Okoboji is the largest and may be the most fun. Summer vacationers have been coming here for more than 100 years. When they're not on the water, they're often riding Okoboji's Ferris wheel or just passing the time away by the shore. When the summer's over, many head back to their farms. Those farms have always held the promise of Iowa's future, which explains why the Iowa state slogan is Fields of Opportunity. But the opportunities that come knocking out here under Iowa's blue skies aren't always what one might expect. Like the time Hollywood came knocking on the Lansing family farm outside the small town of Dyersville. In 1988, the producers of a new Kevin Costner film arrived here with a special request. They wanted permission to put a picket fence around the Lansing's house and then build a baseball diamond in their cornfield. When the Lansing said yes, the Field of Dreams was born. Costner's Oscar-nominated hit movie made this little playing field and Iowa famous around the world. More than 25 years later, people still stop by here almost every day to snap photos, get married, or even join in a game. The movie's "Build It and He Will Come" mantra has made this corner of Iowa a symbol of unbridled faith and can-do optimism. But the rich history of this great state proves that folks here in Iowa don't need Tinseltown to show them the way. From the native tribes that first unearthed riches from its soil, to the hardy settlers who first plowed its fields, and the inventor who came up with the machine that farmers around the world now depend on today. Long before Hollywood ever arrived here, the fields of Iowa were already fields of dreams.